National Security Strategic Threat Analysis. Emerging Security Threat Pattern. March 29, 2025. This report analyzes the convergence of three recent developments within the United States that, when examined together, suggest an increased risk of coordinated violent activity or destabilizing disruption. The assessment draws on historical pattern recognition, comparative analysis of prior security crises, and an understanding of symbolic geopolitical timing. The analysis acknowledges speculative elements but emphasizes that the structural similarities between this pattern and prior real-world incidents justify heightened awareness and readiness. The foundation of this analysis is rooted in triadic pattern recognition, the observation that significant systemic disruptions often emerge through the interaction of three mutually reinforcing factors: 1. Symbolically significant dates or events, 2. Intelligence or security failures, and 3. The active presence of non-state violent actors positioned to exploit those failures. This framework has been applied retrospectively to prior crises, most notably the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023. That incident, while initially appearing disconnected from Russian interests, coincided symbolically with Russian President Vladimir Putin's birthday, and unfolded amidst notable Israeli intelligence failures and the activation of an armed non-state actor, Hamas. Further pattern analysis suggests that a similar structural triad may now be emerging in the United States on March 29, 2025. This date holds deep symbolic significance in the Russian strategic psyche, marking the anniversary of NATO's 2004 expansion into Eastern Europe, an event frequently cited by Putin as a direct betrayal and provocation. The parallels to October 7, 2023, are close enough in structure to merit careful consideration. March 29 marks the date on which NATO formally welcomed 7 Eastern European countries into the alliance in 2004, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Slovenia. For Putin and the Russian security establishment, this moment is viewed not simply as a historical milestone, but as a geopolitical humiliation and strategic threat, a rupture of Russia's post-Cold War influence and buffer zone. This date is embedded in Russian grievance narratives and has been referenced repeatedly by Putin in public addresses and private communications. It is not merely a date on a calendar. It is a symbol of Western encroachment and Russian vulnerability, the kind of symbolic grievance that may, under certain conditions, align with or inspire disruptive or retaliatory actions. The second element in this emerging pattern is a confirmed security breach within the U.S. national security infrastructure. Specifically, in March 2025, it was revealed that senior officials within the U.S. National Security Council and Department of Defense had conducted operational discussions, including details of planned military strikes, over the consumer-grade encrypted messaging application Signal. This breach came to public attention when a journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, was accidentally added to one such Signal chat, exposing sensitive conversations involving key figures including the National Security Advisor, Vice President, and Secretary of Defense. The contents of these communications included operational details about U.S. military activities in the Middle East. While Signal offers end-to-end encryption, it does not meet the security standards required for national security communications. The fact that senior leadership had reverted to such an insecure platform reveals a critical vulnerability in U.S. information security protocols, reminiscent of Israel's intelligence lapses prior to the October 7, 2023 attack. It is plausible that adversarial actors, including Russian intelligence, could have exploited or are actively exploiting this breach. Presence of violent non-state actor. Arrest of MS-13 leader near Washington, D.C. On March 27, 2025, federal and local law enforcement arrested Henry Josue Villatoro Santos, a senior leader of the violent gang MS-13 in Woodbridge, Virginia, approximately 30 miles from the U.S. Capitol. This arrest is not, on its face, unusual. MS-13 has been a known transnational criminal threat for decades. However, the timing and location are of analytical interest. The presence of an MS-13 leader in close proximity to the seat of U.S. political power, combined with known intelligence vulnerabilities, increases the operational risk of opportunistic violence or coordinated destabilization. MS-13, while primarily focused on criminal enterprises, has the decentralized structure and capability to execute high-profile symbolic attacks, particularly if leveraged or incentivized by external actors. Comparative Historical Scenario October 7, 2023. To understand why we are taking this pattern seriously, we need to revisit what happened on October 7, 2023, a date now seared into the strategic consciousness of military and intelligence professionals around the world. On that day, Hamas militants launched an unprecedented and devastating attack against Israel, breaching the borders, massacring civilians, and triggering a full-scale war. At first glance, this appeared to be a localized failure, a surprise attack resulting from complacency, intelligence oversight, and the unique dynamics of the Israel-Gaza conflict. But in the months since, analysts began to notice an uncomfortable pattern, especially those paying attention to timelines, geopolitical advantage, and symbolic timing. The attack fell on Vladimir Putin's birthday. This may seem coincidental, but for those who study patterns of power and influence, especially in the shadow worlds of intelligence and statecraft, the coincidence is hard to ignore. Historically, violent, destabilizing events have repeatedly clustered around dates of personal or geopolitical significance to the Russian president. Whether by design, manipulation, or opportunistic encouragement, these events often leave Russia in a stronger position globally, or at least in a world more chaotic and distracted. On October 7th, Israel suffered one of the worst intelligence failures in its history. Hamas's operational planning went undetected. Defensive postures were relaxed. The border was vulnerable. This kind of intelligence failure, like a frayed wire left exposed, was precisely the opening required for Hamas to act with devastating effectiveness. The consequence was not only mass civilian casualties, but also a shift in global attention and resources, a destabilization of U.S. and Western priorities, opening space on other geopolitical fronts. In hindsight, the triad of elements in that event becomes clear. 1. A date of symbolic significance to Putin. 2. A critical intelligence failure by a Western-aligned power. And 3. The activation of a violent non-state actor to exploit the intelligence failure. Whether Putin himself orchestrated or merely benefited from that chain of events remains unknown. Direct evidence is absent, but the pattern itself is undeniable, and it has left a strong impression on those tasked with safeguarding national security. Emerging pattern March 29, 2025. It is in that context, the October 7th triad, that today's circumstances raise alarm. As of midnight tonight, we have crossed into March 29, a date that carries its own geopolitical weight. On March 29, 2004, NATO underwent its largest post-Cold War expansion, adding 7 Eastern European nations, including the Baltic states, directly into the alliance. For Vladimir Putin, this day marks not only a strategic setback but a moment of humiliation and betrayal. He has referenced this event repeatedly as a foundational grievance in his security narrative. It is reasonable to assume that to Putin and those around him, this is not merely an anniversary, it is an annual reminder of Western encirclement. That alone would not warrant increased concern. But this year, the symbolic date arrives alongside 2 additional concrete factors. First, in the days leading up to today, the U.S. national security establishment has suffered a major intelligence breach. Senior officials within the NSA, DoD, and National Security Council were caught using unsecured signal chats to conduct sensitive military discussions. The breach was not merely theoretical. Operational details about U.S. military strikes were exposed and circulated beyond intended channels. It is difficult to overstate the significance of this lapse. It is an exposure of command-level vulnerabilities at the heart of American security infrastructure, precisely the kind of weakness that adversaries, state or non-state, might exploit. Second, on March 27th, federal and local law enforcement arrested a senior MS-13 leader just outside Washington, D.C. This gang, known for extreme violence and decentralized operational capacity, has historically focused on criminal activities, not political terrorism. But their presence, structure, and proximity to the seat of U.S. government power is now being viewed in a different light. The fact that a major MS-13 figure was operating within 30 miles of the capital on the eve of a symbolically significant date at a moment of intelligence vulnerability cannot be ignored. When we lay these three facts side by side, the structure is strikingly similar to the pattern observed on October 7, 2023, a symbolic date connected to Putin and Russia's long-standing grievances, a clear, documented intelligence failure by a US-aligned power, the presence of a violent, non-state actor capable of conducting disruptive, high-profile violence. It is this alignment, not any single element, that elevates concern. Each of these events, on its own, would merit attention. Together they form a pattern too familiar to overlook. It must be emphasized, there is no direct evidence that these events are coordinated, nor that Russia or any external actor is actively controlling or incentivizing MS-13. However, if we allow ourselves to presume, for the sake of preparedness, that the pattern itself is meaningful, that symbolic dates, intelligence lapses, and violent non-state actors consistently coalesce to produce major security events, then the risk becomes self-evident. Even if no one has planned to connect these dots, the structure alone creates systemic vulnerability. In a complex system, when multiple points of weakness align, exploitation becomes not only possible but likely, whether by design, opportunism, or sheer coincidence. If history teaches anything, it is that vulnerabilities of this kind tend not to pass unexploited. Why this analysis matters. The comparison to October 7 is not offered as proof of conspiracy. It is offered as a recognition of pattern and risk, grounded in history. We cannot say with certainty that Putin has manipulated these elements. What we can say, and what this analysis insists upon, is that the triadic pattern emerging tonight around March 29 is structurally similar to the conditions that produced one of the most devastating intelligence failures and asymmetric attacks in recent memory. The lesson of October 7 is not only that intelligence failures are dangerous, it is that when intelligence failures coincide with symbolic dates and violent actors positioned to exploit them, the result can be catastrophic. It is precisely because there is no evidence of orchestration that vigilance is required. The system itself is dangerous when these conditions align.